again, we're wired to protect ourselves. And I think a lot of the times becoming passive is a way of protecting ourselves. Because when you're passive, you're not putting yourself in those vulnerable situations anymore. And that could be anything. That could be putting yourself out there physically, emotionally, business-wise, career-wise, fitness-wise, whatever. I think that's a big one, that if we could break that one down specifically, then it does enable us to be more active instead of passive.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast. I'm Rachel.
I'm Kelsey.
Guys, we have Case Kenny on for you today. If you don't know Case, okay, his podcast.
You're about to.
You're about to. His podcast is amazing. It's New Mindset Hoodis. And he's an entrepreneur, a mindfulness expert. And on his podcast, so he podcasts twice a week. God love him. My God, I can't imagine. But he is so no BS, and he just takes on everything that you would want to hear about how to live your best life, like mindfulness. He empowers you to be happier, to live a more fulfilling life. All of the self-worth and empowerment, whether it be like dating, relationships, career stuff. He's really, really inspirational. And you might have seen his Instagram. He is the Post-it.
The Post-it, and we had an awesome conversation with him. I think you'll get a lot of insights and just a lot of like raw self-reflection that I think that we would all really benefit from. So hopefully you love this episode as much as we did.
Welcome, Case Kenny, to our show. We are so happy to have you.
Hello. Good to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited about this. You're obviously a very inspirational person in the space, and you've grown quite a awesome following from, what you've put out, and it's really great, inspiring content that I want everyone to be exposed to, because I think it's really life-changing. So I want to thank you for being here. And I want to just start with letting you kind of talk about how you've become a self-made powerhouse in the space of self-improvement. What led you to this point in your career, and like, how did you get started?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, for me, so I'm 34, and I feel like, have gone through many stages, many evolutions personally, career-wise, kind of everything in between. For me, like as of current, I would describe myself as an author and a podcaster and, business builder. Prior to that, I worked in advertising for a long time, for, past 12, 13 years, in Chicago. And, my trajectory of doing this for a living, which, I describe as, mindfulness, self-development, self-improvement, whatever you want to call it, certainly very serendipitous, random. Just it's a story of me just like pulling on this thread of what interests me and what I'm passionate about. And basically the long short story is, in 2018 or so, kind of just was at a point where I was like, I would hate to look back on my life being, 28 or, fast forward to 38 or 48 and look back and be like, man, I was going down a path that was fine and good. I've lived a great life and privileged life, but to look back and be like, man, I wasn't really doing things that were true to me. I wasn't really working a career that was true to me, dating the people that were true to me, so on and so forth. I was like, man, I would really hate that. I think regret has been a big motivating force in my life, because it's the one thing you can't change. And basically when I was 28, it was kind of like, what if I'm wrong about some of these things? And I didn't really have a good answer to that. And I'm very type A. And I was like, I'm gonna start a podcast to kind of address some of these questions that I have for myself. A very cliche thing to do in 2022, a little less cliche in 2018 to start a podcast. But that was basically it. I started the podcast to help me, Case, answer some of these questions, not to become a thought leader, not to become, anything, not to build a following, anything like that. It really did come from a very self-altruistic place of wanting to, come up with answers for myself. And then fast forward, I basically realized that through that process of asking myself these questions, what am I anxious about? What do I want to do? What makes me feel this way? What makes me feel that way? So on and so forth. I realized what I was doing, which was mindfulness. And then mindfulness is one of those things that the more you practice it, the better you get at it. And through that process, it also seemed that I was, really hitting a chord with a lot of common issues that people face. And the podcast started to blow up. People started to follow me. I wrote a couple books, created a couple journals. Podcast kept getting bigger and bigger, started posting on social media. And here we are today. That's the shortest version of the story. But I think the real theme is, starting from a place of I had a need in my life, sat down and started to kind of address it publicly, was kind of the level of vulnerability there. And then I think what I realized through that process is, it's such a common feeling what I was facing. And then, I think I've been given certain talents and skills in life. And I think my ability to kind of simplify emotions for myself, people really kind of resonated with other people. And yeah, and that's it. And I think just through that process, I've realized the power of mindfulness, this one kind of ambiguous long word, what it really means, how to bring it in life in different ways, not just in a podcast, but in writing and in music and in journaling and products and all these different things. So it's been just like such a privileged journey to be able to say, this interests me, I have this need. And then I just kept pulling on that string, and, here we are, 4.5 years later.
I mean, so here's the thing. We talk to a lot of like entrepreneurs, people who are in this space who have kind of found their way through like self-improvement or ways to help others. And the common theme that I think that you brought out is so important is like coming from a place of like authenticity and trying to um find what really like spoke to you is one of the most important and like themes that just resonate with so many people. Like you came from a really authentic place of like, hey, I would like to answer some of these questions for myself. And it turns out so many other people have those same questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I didn't do it that way, I certainly wouldn't be here with the level of success, if you want to call it, that I've garnered. And two, I wouldn't have the incentive to keep going. I mean, I've done 457 episodes. That's a lot of self development talk, and I don't do guests, so that's all just Case's opinion on things. That's a lot of opinion, and I wouldn't have the motivation to do it twice a week for almost 5 years. But what pushes me to do it is like, it is so rewarding for me, and it comes from that place, and it continues to come from that place. And I think I struck gold in that sense, and having this internal desire and alignment. And then, yeah, to your point, as a business builder, like you need, I mean, it's a cliche to say you need a why, but you truly do. I used to read articles like that and be like, whatever, just build a product. Not the case. Like, if you don't have a personal passion connection to it, like, you can get so far. Don't get me wrong. I know some people who are like, I don't really care, but I'm good at it. You can get pretty far, but it won't last. And I don't think you could build the impact you want, the legacy you want, and it's draining internally. So I am very fortunate to have found this thing that helps me so much, but then also it's in a space where it helps other people, unlike maybe some other spaces. So it really is very, very gratifying.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. And just to your point, you have a lot of episodes. So you've run through a lot of topics, and run through some like multifaceted discussions. And one of the themes that we picked out was self-perception. And how do you feel like our perception of ourselves impact our life?
I mean, I think it's everything. I think it's the biggest enhancement of our life, or it's the biggest detraction from our life. Truly, I mean, if you have a low opinion of yourself, why would you do certain things? Like, we're wired to protect ourselves physically, biologically, evolutionary, and emotionally. Like, we don't want to put ourselves in situations where we could be hurt in any sense. And if we have an opinion of ourselves that in some way or another comes from a place of comparison, comes from a place of lack, comes from a place of loss, then yeah, why would we do certain things? We would talk ourselves out of shooting our shot, starting a business, doing a thing, trying hard, so on and so forth. We wouldn't do those things. So I mean, yeah, these are obvious things, of course. We're talking about self-esteem, we're talking about self-love, we're talking about confidence, but I mean, truly, 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 those are though our self-perception creates our reality of the world outside of ourselves. And, I love talking about the topic because I think it's one of those things where we generally start in some sense with a pretty good view of ourselves, but then slowly it erodes. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Life, comparison, psychology. But I mean, I think it's one of those things that, you can fix in a sense, and it comes through effort, and it comes through muscle memory almost, and it comes through repetition. And, frankly, it comes from embracing the things that you're scared of the most. Like, the reason that we, a lot of the time, have such a negative self-perception is because, we've been rejected before, we've failed before, we've been embarrassed, betrayed, whatever negative word you could think of. And it's fear of that repeated experience that makes us go even further into our little cave. I think, unfortunately, the way out of that, I call it living in the gray of life. Living in the gray of life, where you have that low self-perception. The key to getting out of the gray is to go through those experiences one more time, two more times, to realize what they offer you. I talk a lot about the power of contrast. I think it's it's a poetic topic, in that, to figure out what we want in life, we basically have to know what we don't want. And I think when it comes to self-perception, we have to go through these negative times in life to truly know what we're capable of seeing in ourselves. So it's a topic I'm very passionate about. But to answer your question, I think it's everything. And I think mindfulness as a tool to help you become more self-aware, to challenge yourself with why, and then to enhance that with effort. I think it's everything.
I that just struck me. Obviously, the idea of self-perception literally paving every single path about, what you are, the path that you're going to take in your life. I think that sometimes it can feel really heavy for people, because oftentimes we want to put things out of our control. And it feels more comfortable when things are happening to us. And we feel a little bit less in the driver's seat. I see this as a common theme with, when we're talking about self-improvement, is, these are the things that happened to me, and this was just my response to them. And the feeling of feeling ultimately so powerful, and that your self-perception is really guiding a lot of the decisions that you're making, and subsequently a lot of the things that are happening to you, it's like kind of heavy. Do you feel that a lot of people struggle with the idea that they are actually in the driver's seat of their self-perception, and that they're not sort of a victim to it?
That's a great point. Again, we're wired to protect ourselves, even though ironically it's not, but in our heads it is. And I think a lot of the times becoming passive is a way of protecting ourselves, because when you're passive, you're not putting yourself in those vulnerable situations anymore. I have a book coming out soon, and I dedicated a whole chapter to the idea of, like, kind of respectfully to ourselves, like how hypocritical we are. Like, we can look at the world around us and we openly say we admire certain traits in other people, specifically traits around vulnerability. We admire vulnerable people. We're like, man, we love that friend who'll say anything. We love that friend who will go and take a selfie or walk up to a stranger and introduce themselves. We admire those vulnerable actions in other people. But then when it comes to us, we think it is horrible. We think we're not the ones to do it. We're very hypocritical in that we can literally take the same exact action, emotion, vulnerability, and admire it in other people, but detest it in ourselves. There was this study done. I'll do a quick summary of it because I think it's super, super interesting around this topic. It's called the beautiful mess effect. And there were these researchers, I think in the 90s or even more recently, and they labeled it the beautiful mess effect, which is basically the idea that we can look at certain traits and vulnerabilities in other people and we see it as beautiful, but in ourselves we consider it a mess. And they basically did these studies where they put people in a room, and they divided it into two groups. One group, they said, hey group, you're going to go in front of this other group and you're going to sing a song. You don't know what it is, but we're going to tell you right beforehand, and you're going to sing it. You've never heard it, you've never rehearsed it, and you're going to sing it in front of these people, and those people are going to judge you. And they went to the other group and said, hey, these strangers are going to sing it and you're going to judge it. And then right before they did it, and they didn't actually do it, right before they did it, they had both groups do a rating. For the group that they told that they were going to sing it, they said, okay, how do you feel in this moment? How do you think people are going to react? And obviously they destroyed themselves. They say it's going to be horrible, it's going to be embarrassing, people are going to hate them, they're going to be booed, so on and so forth. The other group, though, the group that was told they were going to judge, they said, man, it's going to be courageous. Like, kudos to anyone who would have the balls to get up there and do this thing. And they did this time and time again with different vulnerable actions: admitting a mistake, showing your body, admitting you were wrong, professing love to someone. And each time, the people that were told that they were going to do it, they rated it so low, but the people that they told were going to judge it, they rated it high. And it was the same action. And it basically showed this hypocrisy we have when it comes to vulnerability. And it's such an interesting thing. I mean, do with that information what you will. I think sometimes breaking free of the constraints we have on ourselves can come from just like realizations like that, where it's like, wait a minute, I really admire that trait in other people, but why don't I admire the same trait in myself? And you're like, oh, okay. And then you kind of break free. But it's the same idea. It's like, we have this odd wiring of self-preservation that comes from fear. Like, I think sometimes we confuse preservation with fear, and fear really is fear of repeated experiences, because fears come from a place, right? Usually they're not just irrational, they come from an experience that hurt. But I think the idea of looking at vulnerability as a topic, and that could be anything. That could be putting yourself out there physically, emotionally, business wise, career wise, fitness wise, whatever. I think that's a big one, that if we could break that one down specifically, then it does enable us to be more active instead of passive. So, long-winded answer, but I think that the topic of vulnerability is like really the catalyst for a lot of that change.
I love it. I love that. And I think it is a great segue into the next question, which we wanted to talk about self-talk for a minute, because it is so hand in hand with self-perception. I think that when we start talking about self-perception, self-talk is a good place to start, because you can't necessarily, or it's difficult to look in the mirror and just say, like, I'm going to change my perception today, and I'm going to break down all of those old habits. But perhaps starting with self-talk and sort of changing the inner dialogue, or being even aware of the inner dialogue, can be a helpful place to start. Do you think that most people's inner dialogue is too critical? And how, if so, how does this sort of affect their decisions and affect their relationships?
I think it's probably overwhelmingly critical. I'm sure there's been studies on that, but yeah, I think it's overwhelmingly critical. Our internal self-talk. I think a lot about that, like self-talk, or just like talk in general, and like the words we use, specifically the words we use to describe ourselves internally, mostly. And I think we kind of mess up from the start, like with the way that we try to describe ourselves. Like, a lot of times we set out, be like, I want to be happy, I want to be confident, I want to be a happy, confident, successful person, right? We have got all these adjectives lined up, which, don't get me wrong, I think are great. And our internal dialogues, we want to support that fact. We want to be like, I feel confident today, or I am happy today. But the problem is, we're very unlikely to be those things consistently. That's life for you. Like, happiness is not something you can control ever, ever, ever. And confidence, of course, you're not going to be confident every day. But for some reason with our wiring, because we've chosen those words as alignment of like, okay, I'm happy, therefore good, I'm not messing up in life. But when we're not happy, and because we've set our internal dialogue North Star to say, I need to be happy, when we're not, we really start to beat ourselves up. And when you don't feel happy for a while, you're like, man, I guess I'm not a happy person. I'm an unhappy person. Or I'm a failure if you're not successful feeling, or I am a loser if you're not feeling confident. So all of a sudden, like, these words that I think at the onset are good sounding. Yeah, of course, who doesn't want to be happy, successful, confident? They can kind of turn on us. And I think our internal dialogues are quick to support that. Like, look at you, like, you did this, of course you're not happy. You did this and you're not successful, so on and so forth. So when it comes to like internal dialogues, I find the power of words to be the key here. And I have this weird thing with words. I really try to stay away from adjectives, because adjectives are, for the most part, out of your control. You can't control if you're happy. You can't control if you're confident. Like, you could try a lot of the time, but a lot of those adjectives are contingent on other people's actions and reactions and luck and randomness. So the thing that I recommend, it's a journal exercise. Actually, I call it the I'm the kind of person who exercise, where you replace those adjectives with verbs. Instead of saying, I am successful, or I want to be successful, I say, I am the kind of person who, and then I throw in as many verb statements as possible. I'm the kind of person who volunteers to go first, who puts in the time doing this, who, creates 3 pieces of content a day, whatever it is that helps you get to the thing. Those are things that no one can take from you. And I find that when you change that, your internal dialogue changes from one of trying to align with like very difficult to achieve adjectives, and it goes to a place of pride. And I think trying to build self-dialogue around pride is so important, because pride is something you can control, because pride comes from your actions, not necessarily other people's reactions or life or outcomes. Like, no one can stop me from showing up, logging in, making phone calls, doing cold calls, whatever it is I'm doing for a living, going to the gym, working out 6 days a week. No one can stop me from that. The results, yeah, they might vary, and that's another story, but no one can stop me from doing those initial step ones. And I find that when we do more of that, that is, we describe ourselves with those verb statements instead of adjectives, our internal dialogue changes around that, because we're doing it. And we're like, even though I'm starting to doubt myself here, here's all the actions I did today. That's pride. So it's a basic thing, and it's not particularly earth-shattering, but I find the words that we use as a North Star for ourselves really do kind of set the intention for our internal self-talk. And I find this exercise of I'm the kind of person who to be like a really great starting point.
I mean, you would consider earth shattering, but I think for a lot of people listening, that would be a great jumping off point to just how we can change some things that we're doing on the daily internally. You know, it's especially this time of year, a lot of people are looking for that like it factor, that thing that's going to change their life for 2023, and it's going to be this like massive overhaul of
Hmm.
everything. And really what it comes down to is like some of the small things that we're doing on a daily basis, the words that we're using towards our internally, the words that how we're describing ourselves. And a lot of these things are just really small incremental changes that might feel awkward at first and might feel really like, I don't know if that's for me. But it's one of those things that really, as you start to work on it and adjust as you go, that make those big differences. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was you had an episode entitled "Don't Believe Everything You Feel." Can you talk about this for a minute and explain why it could be detrimental to our lives?
Yeah, for sure. To be honest, I don't even know what I talked about in that episode. I'll go off off the title and I'll take a guess because I've done so many episodes. I would for one start with saying and I say this in most episodes, that I'm not a trained psychologist or therapist or anything like that. So when I tell people not to believe what they feel, it is coming from a place of anecdotes and practical mindfulness, not encouraging people to ignore how they feel, of course. For me, it comes down to this idea of facts versus feelings. Like in life, there's the way we feel, and there's the things that we know with certainty, the things that we believe so much so that we refuse to negotiate on them. Feelings, on the other hand, are marked principally by temporal nature of time. These are circumstantial feelings. I feel this way now, but I am not this kind of person. I feel anxious now, but I'm not an anxious person. I feel unhappy now, but I'm not an unhappy person, so on and so forth. The problem, of course, is that that line becomes very blurred. Maybe it's supported by our negative self-talk. Maybe it's supported by comparison, massive comparison to other people. So much so where we create these narratives in our head where feelings become facts. And I think, any psychologist, any therapist is really going to encourage you to feel what you feel, but challenge it. The example I would give is, you ask someone to take their shoes off before you let them in their house. And I think a lot about like, feelings and emotions, just like how we feel. And I likened it to like dating sometimes, in that like when we first meet someone, unless you're a completely maybe naive or over loving person, when we meet someone first, we kind of keep them at arm's distance. We want to see if they're legit, if they're real, if their actions align with their words, so on and so forth. We don't let them in. We don't say I love you on date one. We want to see if this person's legit and real. We might very much like them and be fond of them, and we believe in intention, but we don't let them in right away. We play them out for a bit. For some reason, though, we don't do that with our emotions. The second we have an emotion, we're like, come on in, let's go, like, come on in. And again, I'm just trying to break this down as practically as possible. I think we need a sense of skepticism towards those feelings. But the
Yeah.
only way to have skepticism against a feeling is to have facts, something to compare it to, something that you believe this is the truth, and here's why. Not pie in the sky, butterflies and rainbows truths, but actual verifiable, logic driven, mindful truths, right? It could be like a truth about like, I deserve honesty in a relationship because I am an honest person and I give honesty, reciprocity, right? I can prove that. Here's why I deserve it. Not I deserve everything because I'm alive, but because here's why. So then when it comes to those moments where you're feeling a certain way and you're trying to talk yourself out of, for the crazy thought of needing honesty in a relationship or something, you could turn to that fact and say, here's the fact, here's the feeling. Are these the same? No. Okay, I'm going to take a step back from that feeling, give it a day, whatever it may be. And I find that a lot of the time, simply putting up a barrier between what you're feeling, like literally a time barrier, gives you the time to break it down and realize that it's not a fact. But the key to that is having facts. And coming up with facts in life, it can be difficult, especially if you've had negative experiences and you've lived through a lot of that. I recommend therapy. I recommend journaling. I recommend any way to really say, here are all my life experiences. What conclusions, positive conclusions, can I draw from them? And how can I turn to those as wise in my life and those as facts, and then use those to compare to the feeling? So that's really basically my gist of trying to put up a compassionate, mindful barrier between your feelings. in the moment, so that you can compare them to the facts and not just be robot reaction mode where you're like, oh, well, I feel anxious, therefore I'm an anxious person, or this person broke up with me, therefore I'm an unlovable person. Again, now we're talking about words. So I think all these topics are great topics because they flow together so nicely.
I love that. I think that asking the emotion to take its shoes off before it comes in is like a really good way to disarm it. Like, excuse me, but have you taken your shoes off? Because do you actually have any facts to belong here? And, just taking that, and I love putting the time aspect in there too, because sometimes, like this has happened to me a million times, like where how I felt yesterday was like, who was that?
Who was she?
Yeah.
Know her.
It's amazing what time will do. Just 24 hours, you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa, good thing I didn't
deep in there.
Yeah.
It was like, good thing I didn't change my whole life. All I needed was a glass of water. So good thing I didn't throw everything out.
Yeah.
I think
They're
that
temporary. I always have to remind myself of that. I'm like, whoa, you're super hot right now. Like, feelings are temporary. Let's revisit this later.
Take its shoes off. I want to talk about relationships for a second, because I really feel that there's a profound effect with the people that you surround yourself with and the decisions subsequently that you make. And I think that this is a really underutilized part of self-improvement. But you talk a lot about it, Case. You talk a lot about relationships and how to kind of identify a toxic relationship, how to identify one that could be damaging, one that could be beneficial. So can you just give some basic tips on how people can really look at their relationships, take a step back, and see how they could be benefiting or damaging them?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I do talk a lot about relationships because I think mindfulness is such a great application there. It's the most ambiguous, past meets present meets future. It's just very complicated when you have all these people coming together with different variables and different mindsets. I'll give just like the most, most recent topic in my mind that I did an episode on. I think it was this week or last week. It's funny, like in my, being in my 30s now, I think in my 20s, if I heard what I'm about to say, I would have been like, all right, cool, dude. But relationships of any kind, it's such a cliche. They 100% comes down to communication. It 100% does. And it's not the sexiest topic in the world, but it's amazing how often I see, and I've
if you're in your 30s.
What's that?
It's sexy if you're in your 30s.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. To me, I was like, ooh, nice. Very nice. Very nice. Let's communicate. Yeah, it's very contextual. But for me, I think it's one of those things where we're so quick to talk ourselves out of using our words, and that comes from a lot of different places. It comes from having used them in the past, and they were used against us, turned against us, hurt us. Again, the topics are all intertwined here. That's why we live in the gray. But I'll give two examples. The first example I give is like just a mantra that I try to give anyone. Like anytime I get a DM from someone and they're like, well, I don't really know what he's thinking, or I don't really know most of my following is women, so I'm just using those pronouns. I don't know what he's thinking, or I don't know what he wants, or he's acting this way and I'm confused. Of course we don't want to pose a question or say something that is misconstrued or used against us or too emotional or irrational. And of course, we need to be very practical. But I always say, like, when you talk, when you use your words, when you ask questions, when you communicate, you get one of two things. You either get the answer that you want or you get the answer that you need. And either way, you win. You cannot lose with either. When you get the answer you want, that's great. You're like, oh, here's what, I have a question about where your head's at. You get the answer and it's great. Or, hey, I'm kind of not getting this and I need more of it. And they give it to you. Fantastic. You got what you want. On the got what you need side, you're getting clarity. And that can, of course, be coupled with embarrassment, rejection, awkwardness, betrayal, whatever it is, not so great things. But either way, what you want, what you need, it gets you out of the gray in life. It gets you out of that passive zone. It gets you out of the passenger seat. And when that's the case, you can't lose, at least in the long run. In the immediate, it might feel like a loss, but you literally cannot lose in the long run. And it's such a difficult thing, and it's very easy for me to be like, well, just communicate. And in reality, it's much more difficult than that. But I find the mantra of get what I want, get what I need, get what I want, get what I need. It just go and do it. 5 minutes of awkwardness, 5 minutes of heightened emotion, whatever it may be. Like, I would say it's well worth it versus a scenario where you fast forward 5 years from now and you're looking back and you're like, man, I stuck out that relationship not speaking my mind for 2 years because I was afraid of the answer. Which one of those would you rather endure? The pain of regret or 5 minutes of awkwardness? So I'm big on that. Get what I need, get what I want, get what I need, get what I want. So maybe I'll put it there. I think we're not just talking about romantic. I think platonic relationships. I think business partnerships. Colleagues, anything. We're very averse to moments of confrontation, and I'm very conflict averse. I hate it. But you compare it to, I think we need to sometimes operate from a place of trying to minimize regret in our lives, not fear of regret, but minimizing regret in the present. And I think you gotta put those outcomes next to each other. Which would you rather have? An awkward conversation, potential rejection, or looking back and realizing you can't get the time back where you sat passively? Personally, I would take the former, and I hope most people would, or at least we can train ourselves to. But I think that idea of get what I want, get what I need can be really powerful.
Yeah, definitely can. And it's, it seems like the moment of awkwardness seems gigantic right before you're about to do it. But it really, in the grand scheme of things, it's small to the amount of regret that you could have drawing it out to not getting what you need. So I think you've said some really helpful and amazing things people can take into their lives and into 2023. Where can our listeners hear? They're going to want to hear more from you because you're awesome. But where can they find you and where can they hear more from you?
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I hope it's hope it's helpful. So the podcast is New Mindset Who Dis. It's everywhere you can listen to podcasts, and then case.kenny on Instagram. Between those two, you'll get plenty of me and plenty of my sometimes rambling, but hopefully helpful perspective.
Definitely helpful. And I love your sticky notes. Where'd you come up with that idea?
Yeah, so I came up with that idea during COVID, during like the first couple months there in March of 2020. I was just kind of cooped up, and I was like, I want to spread some of my thoughts and feelings. I was like, it's easy to, I love anyone who creates an inspirational quote on the internet, but I was like, man, there's got to be something cooler I could do that's not digital, right? It's very easy to hop into Canva, create a digital quote and put it up. I was like, how can I like bring some real life to this? And I was looking at a empty coffee cup I had. I was like, well, that's kind of some surface area there. So I started writing on coffee cups because like that's something that a lot of people touch every day. Then I lived in downtown Chicago. I was like, man, I live in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Why not combine the two? And that's what started that. And I got better penmanship over time. And, it's just a more personal, real, raw way to bring quotes to life instead of just keeping them digital.
Yeah, I love it.
Thanks.
Well, I just want to thank you for, anyone who puts themselves out there and does this work. Again, this is me admiring the thing that I also am like, I suck at that. I hate myself when I do that. But I'm in awe of your bravery to put yourself out there 2 times a week, and all of the love and inspiration that you share via Instagram, and just living your passion. I just want to say, like, thank you for what you're bringing to the space. It's really, really good for people to be seeing this type of stuff, and you're just bringing so much positivity. So freaking hats off to you, a fellow entrepreneur. Like, let's go. Proud of you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And right back at you. I mean, the respect and the vulnerability goes both ways. So I appreciate that. And kudos to you both for doing the same.
Thank you so much. And guys, don't forget to check him out. His Instagram is awesome. And obviously podcast is fantastic. So don't forget to check him out. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.